My name is Abbey Thiel. I am a food scientist and currently a researcher at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. Mostly right now, I teach college students and do different research projects on anything related to dairy foods. But in my free time, I also like to be a science communicator. So I love talking about food science and have a small YouTube channel and a small food science blog. So everything food science. I've always, from a young age, really liked science and was always good at it. When I was in like high school and started university, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do a science major, but there seemed like a lot of options, and I didn't really understand, which one would be right for me. And I kind of had like a moment of panic when I was a freshman at university, and I was in the engineering school, and I thought, I don't think this is right for me, but I don't know where I'm supposed to be. So I looked through like every science major at the university I was at. And for the first time, that is when I saw food science. I had no idea it existed, had never heard of it before. I was already at this university that had this major. And so I just started to try and learn everything about it. And it actually was a perfect fit. So it kind of was just like a lucky coincidence that I found food science. So I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They have a food science department there. And during my bachelor's degree, those 4 years were like the best 4 years of my life. I felt super prepared because I knew all the professors. So food science is usually a very small major. I was in what they call a big class. Like my year had 40 students, and that was like large for them. So like our classes are very small, so you know all your professors. And that's nice because they have a huge network. So they help you find a job, help you find internships. You can just drop by their office for like homework help. So university for me, I was at a very large university, but like my food science community was very, very small. And actually this weekend, I'm going to one of my friends who is also a food scientist that we did our bachelor's degree together. I'm going to her wedding. So like you meet people that you like stay in contact with the rest of your life. My bachelor's degree is in food science in general, but my PhD is in actually in ice cream. But now I am a bit more general, all dairy products I work on. And this is a very interesting segment of the food sector, because in a lot of countries, so I grew up in the US, now I'm in the Netherlands, there's a huge history with dairy products. Dairy products were always very prevalent and people have always eaten them. But now what we see is that sometimes like rearing cows is actually taking a lot of energy. There might be a lot of emissions. And so there's kind of this future proofing of the dairy industry happening. So people are looking at very different technologies. How sustainable are dairy foods? Are we able to get dairy foods a different way, like using fermentation? So this is actually, I mean, you think dairy foods are like very old school, but there's a lot of changes and updating happening right now. There's a lot of differences in food between the Netherlands and the US. In the US, food generally tends to be bigger, brighter, sweeter. Like everything in the Netherlands is just a bit more dialed back. Like they don't use as much food coloring. In fact, you can't use some of the same food colorings legally. And just everything as is smaller portion sizes. Like it in the US, I feel like Americans really like to make things like sparklier and bigger. And in the Netherlands, the Dutch dough aren't really attracted to that. I've also noticed they have very different grocery shopping habits. So when at least for me, like I would go grocery shopping like once a week and like fill up my car and then I'm good. But Dutch people, they might like bike to the grocery store every day after work and each day just pick up what they need for dinner that night, like much smaller grocery trips, but much more frequently. The US is actually like food wise and technology wise is way more lenient than the Netherlands or the whole EU. So the US already has like bioengineered ingredients, like genetically engineered ingredients on the market, where anything like that is illegal in all of the EU, or they're trying to regulate it or trying to make some of it legal, but it just takes forever because it's not just the Netherlands say, it's they're part of the European Union. So all these countries have to align, where the US is a bit more agile and can be, a bit more ahead of the game because they only worry about the US. Usually, I feel like a misconception is that all food scientists are bad because in the US, we have a lot of obesity problems. Like, people are like, why are the food scientists making potato chips and candy bars? But I think food science is like any tool. It can be used for good and it can be used for evil. And actually, food scientists do a lot of work for good and allow, food to be produced on a mass scale for a very relatively cheaper price point that a lot of other countries are used to. And I think another misconception is that people don't understand how much science is behind their food. So they don't understand that food is always changing. That's why it has a certain shelf life. That's why it goes bad. And that's why we need food scientists to regulate our food chain to make sure that it's safe. Always the number one thing you have to think of with a new food product is safety. Like, safety is the highest priority for any food scientist. So you want to think, is there any microorganism that could grow and make people sick? Is there any allergen that is going to harm someone? So first thing is not very fun, but it's safety. And then probably going down from there, you have to think about who is going to buy this. Will this attract a certain amount of consumers? You also would want to think of like, what's the shelf life? Can it sit at a grocery store for a day, a week, months? What will it look like after a couple months if the consumer throws it in their cupboard and forget it? So it's not super simple. There's a lot of different things that goes into the foods that you see in the grocery store. Probably the most interesting project I'm working on is trying to make yeast cells to make milk proteins instead of having to use a cow, which is what we normally do. And the idea behind this is that there are some sustainability issues behind raising a lot of cows, and the earth has limited resources. So what we're trying to do is basically give the directions that a cow has to make this protein called casein, which is in all dairy products. And we want to give those directions to the yeast cells and see if the yeast cells could make the same protein. So the idea behind this project is trying to make dairy products more sustainable in the future. My day, because I teach food science students, would be different than like a food scientist at a food company. But say for me in the morning, I might be giving some lectures. So I will teach bachelor students and master's students in classes like dairy chemistry or dairy science. And actually in the Netherlands, which was quite different from the States, the lectures for a class are 40 minutes lecture, 10 minutes break, 40 minutes lecture. So it's like heavy duty lectures when you're in lecture. So I'll probably spend most of my morning lecturing, answering questions, staying after class. We might have like a lab after. So I'm teaching a laboratory where the students make their own yogurt, and then we test like how much lactose is in it, how much fat is in it. Are the microbe numbers increasing or decreasing? So probably all morning I will be teaching. And then after lunch, I can sort of switch gears and I might get into research. So part of my role is being a researcher in the dairy group, and we have projects on, anything from like cow's milk, which is pretty normal, but also goat milk, human milk, and like I said, like this potential yeast made milk. So for research wise, I will probably do some reading of journal articles, some writing up articles. I also supervise like master's meetings to get updated on what they're doing, what's working, what's not. And I'll also probably have a couple hours to go into lab myself and run experiments. And by that time, then it's probably time to go home. But basically teaching and research is what my day looks like. I think my biggest wish is that like people know about food science when they're younger, because for me, I kind of was lost for a very long time in like, what do I want to do with my life? And for a lot of science, like people who are interested in science, food science, at least for me, was perfect because it's a mixture of all the other sciences. Like it requires chemistry and biology and physics. And I liked it because I didn't have to choose just like chemistry. As a food scientist, like I get all the different sciences in one, in something that is super relatable because we all eat food. I have a couple of resources I wanted to mention. One of my friends from getting my PhD, he wrote a really nice book called 150 Food Science Questions Answered, where like it's a really easy read. Like each page has a different fun fact. So very relatable, very easy to read. There's a podcast called My Food Job Rocks, where there's just interviews of different people in the food industry. And then I also have a YouTube channel where I talk about food careers or just fun facts that I think are interesting. And that channel is called Abbey the Food Scientist. So much is happening in the food space right now. So like I said, one of my projects is this using yeast to make other food products. So that's precision fermentation. And that is being used in a lot of different ways. A lot of food companies are being pushed to be more sustainable. And there's talk of even having something on a food package that grades, how sustainable was this? There's molecular farming, which is making plant cells. Can they produce animal products? So the food industry right now, I think, is going through this huge like technological advancement where we're trying to balance like all like the limitations of Earth and having to feed more and more people on this Earth each year. So it's a very interesting time.